Hello everyone, Ken and Louie here, this time with Sword Art Online Alicization Lycoris. And this is a game that takes place chronologically after Sword Art Online Fatal Bullet, and I've played through just over about 10 hours of the game, and I wanted to give kind of my first impressions on it for those interested in this title, and if you haven't seen any of any specific reviews on it or wanted to see more of a hands-on thing. So, the first things first is that if you are interested in getting this game, I would recommend going into the graphical settings right away and turning off vertical synchronization, as well as putting on the 30 FPS mode. And the reason being is that this game is incredibly poorly optimized as of right now. And this is pretty much, well, as far as I could tell, like the only way to really get a decent smoothness. And also, I'm only going at 1080p. So, with that out of the way, so for those of you who want a quick summary about this game, of my thoughts on it, this game is basically a game that tries to improve on everything Sword Art Online Hollow Realization did. So it has a more tactical sword skill system, combat system, that utilizes multiple party members. You are essentially controlling 2 or more party members at any given time when you're doing tough fights, or at least you're gonna have to, in order to deal any decent damage, you're gonna have to do like chain attacks and stuff. And also it has vastly improved character models in comparison to Hollow Realization, and slightly improved overall graphics of the game. And the story of this game is based off of the 3rd season of the anime, or at least for the first good chunk of it. And they introduce a new character named Medina in that. So it is slightly different, but for the most part it does faithfully retell the 3rd season of the anime. From as far as I can tell, of course. So, would I recommend this game? I would say definitely not at full price. With how poorly it is optimized, and considering the graphics aren't super amazing, that's really a huge downside. And considering how tactical you need to be in this game, having a less than smooth experience in some areas, it just doesn't really work as well as any game that has poor optimization. But the other thing too is that I would not recommend ever playing this game with mouse and keyboard controls. For whatever reason, the developers of, well, as far as I could tell, Hollow Realization and this game has incredibly bad mouse and keyboard controls. I'm playing this on PC, and I did try playing it roughly the first 4 hours into this game with using mouse and keyboard. Essentially, it doesn't use the mouse at all, or at least it encourages you not to use the mouse except for menus. And doing any of the complicated stuff that the combat system requires you to do, it just doesn't really work. So I would recommend, if you have a controller of any kind, plug it into your PC and using that instead. It is much better. So, with my initial impressions out of the way, let's get into the game itself. So, with vertical sync off, as well as the 30 FPS lock, the load times are okay. They're not amazing, but if you don't have those settings set up, it takes a really long time to load in some areas, and it, like, exceptionally long So this is what the game looks like. So overall, like I said, it isn't spectacular. I did a few days ago replay a little bit of Hollow Realization to see if I was thinking that Hollow Realization looked better than I was thinking. And it turns out that I was kind of right on that this game's graphics, while the character models do look really good, the actual environments in the game don't look that much better than Hollow Realization, and considering that Hollow Realization was a game that was made for PSP, initially, and then ported to the PlayStation 4, that's kind of sad. As well as also Hollow Realization is very smooth and having no problems having high frames per second. So let me see if I can get my controller set up here. Alright, so now I'm using the controller, and you have a status window and then all of your party members, a skill window, so you can set up skills, of course. They have buffs that you can put on, as well as 4 sword skills, and then a combo finisher skill, and then passive skills and all that. And then this is the skill tree, which in the middle is all of the classes, or at least the ones you start out with, attack, defense, and buffing, and all of these skills that you spend your skill points on, as well as the different weapon types. And what is really weird is that in order to unlock these different weapon types, you have to actually have Kirito equip it in order to unlock them. So like for the katana and whip, I needed to actually physically have a whip that Kirito could use in order to learn those skills, which is incredibly awkward when you have characters in your party like Medina or Linia, who uses a two-handed sword, that you can't learn any skills for them because they don't allow you to equip their weapons onto Kirito unless you have another one of that type. Like, you can't unequip your party members with having no weapon at all. So it's just an odd choice. A nice thing is that when you unlock skills, it unlocks them for everybody. So even if somebody is an attacker, they can also use like different skills from different EX skills. So for an example, like the buffing skills, you can put on someone who has the attacker skill equipped. So honestly, the EX skills don't really matter in the sense of what you have equipped. So yeah, and then of course they have kind of the standard different equipment that you can use and accessories and all that. And then the world map is kind of, I would say, about the same size as Fatal Bullet's maps were, which are pretty good size. And then you have a world map, the main quest, side quests, and then they kind of have these trials that you can do for skill points. So, not bad. So, from a system standpoint, it's alright. So for the story, getting into the story, like I said at the beginning, this game mostly focuses on the things that happen in Season 3 of the anime. But there are variations, like I said. So Medina, the new character, this character here, she plays a pretty big role in the story, and and she uses a katana, so again, you actually need to buy your own katana or get one from a chest or something in order to even give her more katana skills, irritatingly enough. But I thought Medina's story, in combined with the Season 3 storyline, was quite well done. And then you can also see like all of the different characters that will eventually be playable. Like, for an example, Selka here, I've never been able to put her in my party yet, but eventually, I'm sure, as the game progresses, they'll allow you to customize your party however you want. So I am just at the point where you unlock Roni and Taisei to have 4 people in my party. And one thing that is really bizarre to me is that the game starts out with Kirito fighting Administrator, the Pontifex, which is just a bizarre place to start, and it's for the tutorial. So you start out with dual wielding and everything and fighting her, which, if you've never watched Season 3 of the anime and then you're jumping into this game, that is kind of a spoiler. Kind of a massive spoiler, in a sense. And also, they gave her a level and everything, level 20. Now, obviously, as you can see here, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Kirito are level 17, so having her level, she's obviously not level 20 when you actually fight her later on, because otherwise that wouldn't make any sense. I mean, I haven't even fought Alice yet, or any of the Integrity Knights for that matter. But at the same time, it like gives you an idea of possibly where you would fight her. I don't know, just the whole thing is incredibly strange. I would have thought that they would have had Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh! Sparring or something in order to do the tutorial. They do progressively have tutorials later on to do the more complicated stuff of the combat system, and I think it's paced pretty well. The storyline overall, I think, is paced decently well. The only thing is that, well, in the first 5 hours or so, it has a good mix of letting you do whatever you want and storyline at the same time. But as soon as you get to the get to this middle area, well, whatever it's called, Centauria, I think it is, the capital, it has an unbelievably high amount of cutscenes. Like, I would say that the mix is maybe between 80 and 90% cutscene throughout that whole thing. I mean, they do have, like, really tiny breaks, but they're pretty much all on, like, kill this monster and then go back to the capital, and it just... If you want to... If you are getting into this game hoping to have a really high amount of combat and everything and exploring areas, unfortunately the game doesn't really allow for that. And the other thing too is that as soon as you get to the capital and enrolled in the Sword Academy, they don't allow you to go back to any of the previous areas that you've explored, which is just a really odd thing to me. Like, why would that matter? I mean, why wouldn't they allow me to do side quests that I just decided not to do at the time? It's just really strange. So from a story point of view, like, the pacing, like, for the story itself is okay, but the high emphasis on how many cutscenes they have to tell those stories, to tell the story overall, as soon as you get to the capital, it just... It's all of... It's quite a lot. So, when it comes to getting quests and stuff, what I find is really nice is that when you talk to people who give quests, it has like a cutscene like this, and honestly, I quite like that. And then you can ask them for information and everything about what the quest is. Like, some are better on giving hints than others. And then also in towns, you have people like doing odds and ends of things. Like, they're actually doing stuff around the town, and I feel like it really brings the game to life in towns and everything. So overall, I quite like that. The other thing too, when it comes to graphics, right here, like in some areas in the countryside and everything, like I can visibly see that this area, like with the lines in the dirt and everything, like they visibly see them as if they were copy and pasted. Like, I don't know. That really draws my eye, and it is really just doesn't feel right. Like, when you go outside, you don't see lines in the dirt that look pretty much exactly the same or anything. It just looks copy and pasted. And it just doesn't look good to me. Another thing to point out too is that running water, for whatever reason, just doesn't, in some areas, don't really look right. It's as if they, in most of the time, it doesn't even have those foam areas along the sides of a riverbank and stuff. This is like one of the few areas that I found that actually has that at any point, but most of the time they don't, so it just looks really weird to me. Here's probably a better view of it with the sun shining on it to kind of emphasize it. It just, running water just doesn't really look that good in this game. So with that out of the way, so how is that combat system? So when you press R1 with a PS4 controller, it shows all of your buffs, and then you use the D-pad in order to activate them, and you can put healing items and buffing items in there as well. And then you can choose between 4 skills at any given time. And then when you press L1, it shows what your current partner is able to do. And you can force them to activate a certain skill. So let's say I'm fighting an enemy in front of me, and I'm in the middle of a combat animation. Well, I can order Yu-Gi-Oh here to do a different attack of some sort while I'm in the middle of doing that, and that is honestly really nice. The other thing is that you can also order them to do different things according to this list. The only problem, though, is that it pretty much only does this once. Like, you can kind of put orders like ahead of time before you get into combat, but as soon as you get into combat, and let's say for taunt enemies, he might taunt the group once, but then he doesn't do it again, and then they might lose aggro and whatever. So it's kind of like a one-time thing. Like, it doesn't force their AI to continuously prioritize that, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, I'm glad that I can have direct control of my party members, but constantly saying to a buffer to buff my party or prioritize defense or something, it just makes it so that it's just a lot more complicated than I think it needs to be. So, I don't know. That's just kind of weird to me. The other thing too is that they kind of emphasize on using your entire party, where while you can, it's kind of hard to do that because you have to hold down L1 and then you switch to each party member. So I mean, it can work, but in the middle of combat, like, it's gonna feel pretty jarring. The other thing too is that when there is a way to order your party members to go to certain areas, so you can position them wherever you want to prepare for a strike, or to run away from attacks, I guess, too. Which is really nice, and it actually slows down time to allow you to do this. So that's a really neat feature. What else? So, when you weaken an enemy, a level 26. Okay, I don't really want to fight those. When you launch an enemy with only one party member, you can't really hit them enough to keep juggling them, so that's kind of why you need to also keep in mind of having your other party members use skills to keep them up in the air and whatnot. So let's see if I can find an enemy that's actually not over level 20. If you face enemies that are over your level in this game, for some reason they're just incredibly tanky, and that is kind of a good thing in this game, ironically enough, facing tanky enemies, because when you're facing weaker enemies, you're not really able to utilize the more complicated aspects of the combat system. So as you can see here, like being level 10, or 11 on this B here, so I can order Yu-Gi-Oh to do a leap there, unless he's in the middle of something. Yeah, just like that. So there is quite a bit of strategy involved in this game, but being only 10 hours in the game, I haven't really mastered it well enough to fight like the really tough enemies. But yeah, if you fight tankier enemies, that is when the combat system really gets on its own, forcing you to utilize the various mechanics at its disposal. And it might seem slow combat-wise. I've read a lot of things that a lot of people didn't like how the animations and stuff, or the combat feels a lot slower in comparison to some of the previous games. And to be completely honest, when I think about it, it kind of has to be in order to give you enough time to think about what you're doing. Which, again, doesn't really help when you can't constantly... when you can't permanently assign someone a role. That doesn't really help the matter. And lastly, you can do various different magics. So they have 8 total different magic types, and each one does their own thing, and each one also has 3 different levels as soon as you get far enough to unlock them all. So for an example, the light element gives you health back, and then wind can give you movement speed, water does damage, ice does damage, some even like builds defense and whatnot, so they do have quite a bit of variety in the magic system. But I kind of feel like it's really clunky to use in the middle of combat, because you have to disengage and then spend time to charge it, as well as spending the time to actually cast it, and I don't know, it just feels disorienting when also the game kind of emphasizes you on dodging and blocking. So I don't know, it just kind of feels weird doing sword skills and then transferring over to magic. It just doesn't really feel like it works well, like having both at your disposal, if that makes sense. Like if I was playing a character like Selka, who looks like she can only use magic, that would probably work a whole lot better than having sword skills and magic available to me at any given time. that's just my opinion on the matter. So overall, this game, with the technical issues, this game is really disappointing on that end. I don't really understand why a game that looks like this runs the way it does. And there are some people who are saying, like, disabling the Steam overlay or doing some extra things in order to get the frame rate higher. Like, I shouldn't have to do that for a game that doesn't look AAA quality, if that makes any sense. Like, if I was playing if I was playing a PlayStation 5 game, for an example, that was ported to PC with the amount of graphics that that game has, then it would make a lot more sense. But since this game doesn't have that level of visuals, I just don't understand why it doesn't perform better than it does. The other thing too is that the game was actually delayed for 2 months, and as far as I could tell, people who had news on the matter on YouTube were saying that the developers thought it was ready to ship in May. Well, they were given 2 months, and they thought its performance was fine. Like, was there just not enough playtesting? Like, I have a pretty beefy rig right now. I have a 16-core 32-thread processor, I think a AMD 3950, I want to say, as well as a 1080 video card. Like, I don't know, as well as I think either 16 or 32 gigs of RAM. So it just doesn't make sense to me that it just doesn't have better performance than it does. So again, this game, I would definitely say wait for a sale if you can. It's not worth $60. I would say it's probably worth 30 or 40 at the very most. And that is only because, in my personal opinion, I like the story and gameplay ideas enough that it really gets me intrigued. That I feel like once I get a lot better with the combat system, it will feel really good. But at the same time, with the technical issues, and especially with what it sounds like they didn't improve the performance during the 2 months that they had for the delays and everything, it's really hard to excuse. But yeah, so that's kind of my first impressions of my first 10-ish hours of the game. It says that I have a playtime of just over 14. So overall, like, if I were gonna give it a rating out of 10, I would probably give it like maybe a 6.5 out of 10 or something like that. If it was running smoothly, it would probably get more like a 7.5, but like with the graphics and everything, I don't know. I was just hoping that it would look a whole lot better than it did, especially since this game wasn't made with the PSP in mind. It was made with the PC, Xbox One, and PS4 in mind. So, I don't know. So, that's all I got. So, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully this will give you an idea of whether or not you want to purchase Sword Art Online Alicization Lycoris. And personally, I do not plan on doing a YouTube playthrough, a recorded playthrough of this game. But if I like it enough, and if they do like optimization patches, maybe I'll think about it, but just not anytime soon, and I'm gonna just play through the story at my own pace. So yeah, with that, thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day.